Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Researchers from the University of Toronto have developed a comprehensive report about creating accessible and inclusive playgrounds. Here to tell you more is Dr. Kelly ArbourNicitopoulos, an associate professor studying disability and physical activity at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education. Dr. ArbourNicitopoulos, thank you so much for making time to be with us today. We're grateful.
Thank you very much for having me, Dave.
So since 2018, you and your team have been working with the Canadian Tire Jumpstart charities to evaluate their inclusive play initiative. What exactly have you been analyzing and why?
Yeah, no, great question. So I had the pleasure of leading this team, and in addition to looking at their playground, so for the audience who are not as familiar, so Canadian Tire Jumpstart charity, they're playgrounds that are designed to be inclusive for children of all abilities. So this is part of the larger Play Finds a Way initiative, and they committed to building at least one inclusive playground across all provinces and territories in Canada. Currently, I think majority of provinces have at least one. And just in terms of to give you the scope of these playgrounds, they are upwards of 15,000 square feet. They entail several different features. So, for example, flat surfaces, elevated ramps to different locations in the playground, different equipment that allow children to engage together in play. And so I was really intrigued about this, particularly with our playgrounds. And, I think all of us here that are listening today are really committed to making play inclusive to all children, specifically those with disabilities. So I wanted to be able to explore more of the experiences of families of children with disabilities as those without disabilities in using these playgrounds. So currently, we've spoken to just under 80 individuals, so which includes families of parents and their children without disabilities, as well as we've also spoken to some recreation programmers across the different municipalities, some educational professionals, and how they use these spaces. Now, the report that was released a few weeks ago, that was another piece of this project. So in addition to learning about experiences of families in the communities that have these playgrounds, we were also committed to look at within the larger literature and practices that are used by playground developers, what makes it a playground fully inclusive for children with disabilities. So that report that was released provides these considerations and strategies for making a playground inclusive to children with disabilities, but also parents and grandparents who experience disability.
We'll get to the recommendations and strategies and considerations in just a moment, but I want to drill down into something that may seem like minutia, but I like asking this question to people who are doing the research, because so oftentimes people use the word accessible and inclusive interchangeably. Even I'm guilty of that sometimes. To your mind, are those terms interchangeable?
No. Flat out no. People do use them interchangeably. I think in terms of accessibility, there are certain standards, although arguably those standards can definitely be built upon. But for something to be accessible, you can access. Like, let's say, for example, a playground. So if you have rubberized surface, you can make an individual who uses, let's say, a wheelchair can access the ground level. But does that then mean they can access in terms of the elevated spaces in there? So accessibility, there are often minimums to reach. And whereas inclusivity really goes beyond just the built environment in my mind, that social environment too, of that sense of belonging. So if I could take, for example, the Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities playgrounds, they have, for example, images of children who use wheelchairs in they have panels. So it's just that sense of belonging, of seeing, for example, a child seeing themselves in that space. To me, that means inclusive and goes to the experience, not just a matter of meeting a standard.
Yeah, we talk to a lot of people who are involved in universal design on the show, whether it be physical space or digital space. And so oftentimes one of the things we always come back to is usability, right? That it's not just a matter of saying you have a feature, is the feature usable?
Yeah, Exactly. I mean, and I think you've said it quite brilliantly. So, I think that's something going back to the why of the work that we're doing is okay. Well, the this initiative, it's an incredible initiative by Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities, and I think as researchers, we want to dive deeper into that initiative. Our communities finding these spaces to be inclusive. While
Mm.
they're accessible, are they fully inclusive for their child, their families? So that's a really important piece of our work.
So you mentioned strategies and considerations and recommendations when it comes to designing a more inclusive playground. We'd be here the entire hour if we had to walk through all 13 of them. But what are some of the specific ones that you'd like to highlight that really even maybe jumped off the page to you as you were putting them together?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, the first in terms of the entry into the space, like, and so that's one of the key parts, and a lot of the research that we looked at, the different studies come into the entry. So entrance into the playground space. I have two children. They don't experience disability, but for them, it like, if you're waving like say, a piece of candy in front of them, but they can't have that. I think that's the same experience of seeing a playground, but there's a large border around it, and you can't get into that space. So our recommendation on entrance to the playground space is wide and free of obstacles. It really reaches out. The surfacing, that is a key piece. Playground users, I think we are very familiar with sand, with wood chips. There are a lot of play experts out there that speak to the value of what's called loose parts play and having things around sand and wood chips around a constructive type play. Well, that is important. I think we really need to think about, though, the right of all children to play. So sand creates an incredible barrier for individuals who use mobility devices, particularly. So that is something that within our recommendations, we highlight around the surfacing to be flat and uniform, ideally throughout the playground, but definitely in strategic places to allow access to different areas, not just access, but going back to the usability piece of it. And I think for me, the number one for our group really jumped out. But at the same time, I think being in this space, we think, of course, this should be here, is around the design process, the user involvement, and being families of children with disabilities. So involving children in the design process, children experience disability and their caregivers, as well as disability organizations. That to me is key. A community committing to having a playground in their space, you first and foremost need to involve the community and those, all members of the community, not just a select group.
This is something you and your colleagues have been working on for some time, and it's 141 pages. So that's a very substantial piece of work that you've got in place there. What are the next steps? Are you hoping to maybe expand upon this?
Yeah, great question. I think first we released the information, and now in terms of comes all further education and how to use these considerations and strategies. So our team is really thinking now about how can we do this in, I'd say, an equitable way. How do we make sure we reach out to those different communities who could make use of this information, whether that be through webinars, sometimes maybe in-person kind of discussions, but there needs to be 141 pages is a very lengthy document. And I think we recognize appreciation of that, but also being able to offer some further education of how to dive deeper into those considerations and strategies. And I mean, something that I'm also really keen on is, well, partnering with Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities. Well, our research does look at those playgrounds. I'm also really intrigued on how can we retrofit existing playgrounds, recognizing not all playgrounds can be 15,000 square feet.
Mm.
So how can we revisit some of our playgrounds in our community to make them more usable, make them more friendly to the children with disabilities, parents, caregivers who experience disabilities.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense, especially as we invest in retrofitting some of these spaces. Are we making sure that as we're doing those retrofittings to existing spaces, are we taking these considerations into account? It makes so much sense to make that as a huge goal as we move forward. You mentioned that you want to get that information out there. Where can people get access to these recommendations in the report? Is it publicly available?
It is. So the 140-page document is located at, it's actually on the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, because it's led by my colleague Tim Ross, who's a scientist there. So there is a website. I wonder if I can provide that after the show. But
we'll put it up on the blog after the show at AMI.ca/nowblog, because we've already hopefully conditioned people to have that baked into their web browsers. In fact, it should be your home landing page, folks. AMI.ca/nowblog.
Yeah, and also just I can add, there's some there's those 13 recommendations specifically that are on what's called the Canadian Disability Participation website or project website. So cdpp.ca. There's a lot of information there with the playgrounds and as well as other aspects of inclusive and accessible physical activity and play for individuals experiencing disability.
Well, Dr. Arbour-Nicitopoulos, as you do more of these outreach programs and maybe some of these webinars that you guys want to do, keep us posted, and we'll make sure to share some of that information with the audience as well, as they may want to get their eyes and ears on that one as well. And we thank you for your time today. I know you're a busy individual doing lots of hard work, so thank you for carving out some time for us.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be on the show today, Dave.
That was Dr. Kelly ArbourNicitopoulos, an associate professor at the University of Toronto. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV, or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI-TV, or download the podcasts wherever you listen.